Why we fear the dark. I don't have much time left, so read every word carefully, because detail is not a vanity I can afford right now. My name is Seth Anderson. I'm a 43-year-old accountant from Washington. I'm married, I have 2 daughters, and I was mortally afraid of clowns for a time in my life. That time lasted from my 10th birthday party up until last night. Before I delve into why I am typing this at 3 a.m, I need you to ask yourself if you fear the dark. If your answer is no, you need to carefully reconsider your answer, for that would have been my first response a mere couple of hours ago. Now, there is nothing I fear more. At this point, I would live with clowns just to forget what happened. I know that sounds funny coming from a near middle-aged man on the internet, but hopefully you'll take my words into consideration if you remotely care about your mental health, let alone your life. There is a reason we were born into fearing the dark, but it's far from the scientific explanations that have been built upon over the years. There really isn't a right word for what it is, but the best I can say is that it's just wrong. It's not the dark itself, it's what festers in it, what is unearthed when the sun hides behind the horizon. It's everything wrong with the world, both physically and morally. When it happens, it's almost as if time is shattered and nothing makes sense. I remember everything so vividly, but to recall the event is almost like having a nightmare. It all started a few hours after I returned home. I live in the woodland area, so it's quite a drive back from where I work. I was raised in the woods, and most of my childhood consisted of walking trails and climbing trees, so it only felt right to settle down away from the city lights to let my kids experience the wonders of the outdoors. To clear my mind of documents and papers, I walk the rugged trails within the forest behind my house, which allows me to relive some familiar feelings from when I was a kid. Overtime had booked me an extra few hours, so by the time I arrived home, the kids and wife were already in bed. Without thinking, I grabbed my walking stick and water bottle and flew out the glass sliding doors, almost forgetting to close them behind me. I quietly slid them shut and trudged through the unkempt yard and found myself at the edge of the forest. I gazed into the piney wonderland, but my eyes only met with a wall of darkness. This was very strange because the forecast for last night was a full moon, which should have given ample light to walk the paths. The moonlight was almost non-existent, as if the land was absorbing it. After turning my phone flashlight on, I began to walk into the abyss. Around a quarter mile in, I looked up from the path and realized I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. It was like looking into a tub of oil, the trees drowning in the dark until you pulled them to the surface. And even stranger was the fact that I couldn't hear anything. The only sounds to accompany me were the sounds of my own footsteps and breathing. I mean, this was very unnerving. Even during the winter, you could hear the sounds of trees rustling in the wind. Pushing the thought out of my head, I walked faster and returned my gaze to the ground. Then I stopped. Rather than a worn dirt path, I was standing on an underbrush and shrubs. Something wasn't right, and every feeling in my body was screaming at this point. I turned around and walked for what seemed like an hour looking for the path, but it felt like I wasn't moving at all. At that moment, my flashlight flicked off. My mind went blank. All I could feel was an overwhelming sense of dread and terror. For some unknown reason, the sense of an impending doom was creeping on me. As seconds passed by, it felt as though whatever was after me was getting closer and closer. My body shot into overdrive and I began sprinting farther and farther into the void. As I stumbled through the forest, my eyes slowly began to adjust to the dark. I could see faint outlines of trees and bushes. I ran for what felt like hours, hoping to break into the clearing or just find a source of light. That's when my phone started ringing. I stopped dead in my tracks, and slowly I reached for my phone and raised it to my face. All I could feel was horror. The contact read off as, "Mom." I didn't know what to do or what to think. You see, I couldn't tell if I was more horrified because I was lost in a void of a forest that I knew better than the back of my own hand, or the fact that I was being called by someone who had died a year ago. I mean, I couldn't even make a call because I didn't have any service, let alone receive one. The caller didn't have a number. It was just blank where the number would be. I had so many thoughts racing through my head, and that number should no longer be active. Reluctantly, I slid the answer button and raised the phone to my ear. Nothing. I heard absolutely nothing. I tried speaking, but the only sound that came from the other side was static. As I was about to hang up, the caller hung up. With bigger problems than a malfunction, I took advantage of the flashlight of my phone. I had 30% battery left, which would have been enough to find my way home. Before I even turned the flashlight switch, the number called again. Dumbfounded, I tried answering again and listened. Just like before, I heard nothing. I tried speaking once again, but still received no reply. The caller hung up. I tried brushing it off, turned on the flashlight, and began jogging in the direction of what I thought was my home. At this point, I wanted nothing more than to get back to my place of safety. About a half an hour later, it happened again. My phone buzzed, alerting me to an incoming call. This time, I answered and angrily shouted at the caller, asking them why they were calling. Then, I heard something. It was faint, but it was definitely there. It was the sound of a man. His words were inaudible, but they sounded very familiar. I replied to him, asking him to speak a little louder, but the words were still inaudible. The caller didn't hang up this time, so I did. As soon as the connection was cut, though, the contact called again. This time I screamed curses into the phone, threatening him with whatever was on top of my head. He spoke again, this time his voice much louder, but heavy static prevented me from putting any of the words together. I angrily hung up and switched to the flashlight. Not even a minute later, the number called again. I had no intention of speaking any further, but force of habit prompted me to answer, and before I could end the call, the man screamed louder than before, though through heavy static, it almost sounded exactly like me. I shakily ended the call and switched back to the flashlight app. That's when I heard it. The screaming didn't stop when I ended the call. I could hear it a distance away behind me, growing louder by the second. It wouldn't stop. The static filter was thicker. My heart was racing and I felt the urge to run. My legs felt like concrete, but I managed to get into a running pace up the hill. The screaming was getting closer and closer, no matter how fast I ran. It sounded like it was only about 10 yards behind me and getting closer. It was absolutely deafening. I felt like my ears were going to burst at any second. I couldn't hear my own breathing at this point. It was getting closer, and it felt like it was only a few feet behind me. Then, out of nowhere, it just stopped. Screaming or not, I was not slowing down. I ran until I felt like my heart was pumping battery acid. Then I ran even more. The further I ran, the easier it was to see. After about 20 minutes, I could make out trees. I shut off the flashlight to save power, then glanced over my shoulder to see if whatever was screaming was still chasing me. There didn't seem to be anything, so I finally allowed myself to slow my pace. It seemed as though hours had passed, and I walked so long that it should have been sunrise by then. However, strangely, The clock on my phone just flashed 12 o'clock, and I had no way of telling what time it was or even how long I'd been in the forest. After trudging for what seemed like an eternity, I finally broke into a clearing. Relieved, I checked my surroundings for any landmarks, but I was clueless as to where I was. Then, I saw something in the middle of the clearing. It was a giant hole, circular in shape, with a diameter of about 150 feet. I crept towards it to get a better look, and couldn't believe my eyes. It was almost like a stone tower, but built into the ground. The walls seemed to be made of cobblestone material, and there were wooden planks sticking out of the walls, wrapped around the entire tower like a spiral staircase. I could see roughly 20 meters down. Then it was just black, as if there were a dark liquid sitting in a glass. Now, I have been walking these woods for a decade, and I have never seen this thing before. I was completely shocked. To my utter dismay, my phone rang again. Rather than a call, it was a text message from the same caller earlier. "Do you see me?" I immediately scanned the area around me. I watched the tree line for movement, but saw nothing. After assuring myself that there was no one around me, I leaned over the edge of the hole and looked into the inverted tower. What I saw will haunt me until the day I die. Down on the wall, directly below me, I saw a hand reaching out from the blackness. Beside it was a face. My face. I don't think I have ever screamed that loud in that moment in my life. The thing mimicking me had an ear-to-ear grin plastered on its face, but the most disturbing part were that it had eyeless sockets. Just before I could get up to run, the thing started to twitch rapidly, opening its mouth to release that god-awful static scream that haunted me hours before. It started to crawl up the wall, its limbs making movements only possible if every bone in your body were broken. There isn't much I remember after that. I recall running like hell out of that place and back into the trees. After that, it was a blur of trees and screaming. Last thing I saw before blacking out is the back porch light of my house illuminating my screaming wife and my 2 girls. My wife called an ambulance, but I woke from unconsciousness before they even arrived. I declined their service and lied to my wife, saying I was just a little lost and passed out from a panic attack. She was reluctant to go back to bed, but eventually did. That was 2 hours ago. About 20 minutes after they went to bed, I heard it again. The screaming returned, and it won't go away. I'm looking out my window now, and I can see it. It's just standing there by the edge of the trees. It doesn't move. It's been standing there for hours. I tried calling the police, but the lines have been cut, and service just won't go through. I tried to wake up my family, but the staircase up to their rooms is gone. It's like I never had a staircase at all. There's just a hallway opening 10 feet off the ground. No matter how much noise I make, they won't reply. All I hear is soft wailing echoing from their rooms. I tried leaving, but the doors just won't open. It's like they've been welded to the wall. I've been here for hours, yet the clock won't move from 3. The screaming won't stop. I'm not sure if it ever will at this point. I'm not sure what else I can even do beside hope that this email goes to someone out there. Please, don't be brave. Keep that fear of the dark. Just stay in the light. It can't follow you there. That thing is still just standing there. Wait. I think it just moved.
Thanks for watching, and before you go, here's a special shout out to my patrons who donated $20 or more. Jocelyn Cunningham, Fantasy Writer Cosplay, Darknado Taki, Avrok Levgry, Jesse, and Simon Leverdeer Delisle. Thanks so much, you guys. If you're interested in becoming a patron and helping me to keep YouTube creepy, please feel free to check out the link in the card.